The morning after the wedding, I was banned from the groom showed up at my door. Eyes swollen, hands shaking, voice trembling. She lied. You need to know the truth about Emily. In that moment I realized the daughter I raised had buried more than love. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now so you don't miss the haunting episodes to come. The morning mist lingered like breath on the window panes of Emma's bakery, soft and hesitant, as if the town itself had yet to wake. The copper bell above the door hadn't rung yet, and the street outside was still silent, except for the occasional chirp of a waking bird and the distant hum of a passing delivery van. Inside the bakery smelled of cinnamon vanilla and blueberry, the same combination it had for nearly 30 years. Joanne stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, apron already streaked with flour and sugar. Her silver-gray hair was tied in a neat bun, her movements slow but methodical. She wasn't in a rush. She never was at this hour. She wiped the last bit of powdered sugar from the marble counter, rinsed the cloth, and turned toward the small dining area of the bakery. 14 tables, 5 booths by the window, 2 high chairs for toddlers, and 1 table in the corner by the bay window. Table 4. Her eyes landed on it. Table 4. It was still there, still set, still untouched. The soft cushion of the left side chair remained flattened just slightly, never quite puffing back to form after all those years. A child had bounced on it with giddy, careless joy. The right side chair, though, had remained perfectly plump, pristine, unused. Joanne stepped towards it slowly, carrying a porcelain plate. On it, a single blueberry scone. Not too big, not too sweet, just the way she remembered it being loved. She placed it down gently on the table next to a neatly folded napkin and a tiny silver fork, and then she stepped back. Her eyes settled on the empty chair. Her breath hitched. 3 years. 3 years and 11 days to be exact. 3 years since that fight. 3 years since Emily walked out the door, voice shaking, tears boiling in her eyes, swearing she'd never come back. The bakery had stayed. The tables, the ovens, the wooden sign hanging above the entrance with the faded pink lettering, Emma's Bakery. Since 1993, it all stayed. Only Emily had left. And yet Joanne never stopped setting the place at table 4. She never said why. She never explained it to the regulars who noticed. Never responded when Mrs. Hampton, the widow from across the street, asked, "You saving that seat for someone special, Joanne?" She simply smiled, a tired, tight-lipped smile. She sat down at the booth next to the window, now holding her coffee, close eyes still pinned on the empty chair. A breeze floated in through the small crack in the front window. It carried with it a scent of spring, earthy and hopeful, but Joanne couldn't feel it. She was anchored too deeply in another season, one that never ended for her. A flicker of movement outside caught her eye. Across the street, a small figure had stopped on the sidewalk. A girl. Maybe 12, 13. Her backpack was too large for her narrow shoulders. Her shoes were scuffed, brown curls tucked beneath a knit cap. Her hands were shoved into the pockets of a denim jacket far too thin for the early chill. She wasn't moving. She was staring at table 4. Joanne didn't react right away. She simply sipped her coffee, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied the girl. Something in the child's posture, something fragile and hesitant, sparked a faint, almost imperceptible shift in her chest. The girl's gaze flicked up to the sign above the bakery, then back to the window, then to table 4 again. She took a step forward, then stopped. Another step, then 2 back. She stood like that for almost a full minute. Then, just as Joanne thought she would turn and disappear into the quiet street, the girl reached out. She placed her hand on the doorknob and pushed. The bell above the door gave its familiar chime, breaking the silence. Joanne rose from her seat, instinctively wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from pensive to neutral, practiced after years of customer service. She approached the counter as the girl stood frozen just inside the door. The smell of blueberry butter and warm yeast wrapped around the girl immediately. She looked dazed, overwhelmed, but she didn't speak. "Morning," Joanne said, voice even. She gave a small nod. You lost. The girl shook her head. Her eyes darted nervously toward the plate on table 4, then quickly away. Her voice was soft, unsteady. I'm not here to buy anything. Joanne raised an eyebrow. I mean, I don't have any money, not yet. Stillness. I was wondering if you're hiring. Joanne stared. The girl rushed forward, words spilling out now like a dam breaking. I can clean, or wash dishes, or maybe help with the baking. I learn fast. I swear I do. I read books. I watch videos. I love baking. I love the smell of bread. I can tell when the yeast's too old. I know about resting time and proofing and water temperature. I even have a journal where I record ratios and notes about different types of flour. Stop! Joanne's voice was firm, not unkind, but solid, like a wall. The girl froze mid-sentence. What's your name? Lucy. Lucy what? There was a pause. Just Lucy, she said quietly. Joanne studied her, long enough for it to get uncomfortable. Then she turned, reached for the cloth by the sink, and resumed wiping down the already clean counter. We're not hiring, she said without looking up. Lucy nodded. Her mouth opened slightly like she might argue, but then closed again. She looked down at her shoes. Okay, she whispered. She turned toward the door. But just before she reached it, Joanne's voice stopped her. You said you know about proofing. Lucy looked over her shoulder. Yes, ma'am. You know what happens if you overproof. Depends on the dough. Joanne blinked. Lucy went on, her voice firmer. If it's a lean dough, overproofing weakens the structure. The gluten can't hold the gas and it collapses. You get flat loaves. If it's enriched like brioche, the butter can slow down fermentation so you can stretch the timing but not too far. A pause. I read a lot, she said again, almost apologetically. Joanne leaned slightly against the counter, still watching her. There was something unreadable in her eyes now, an internal pull, maybe a memory she hadn't invited. You got somewhere to be, Lucy hesitated. No. Joanne crossed her arms. Go home. Get proper shoes. That floor's cold in the back. Come back tomorrow at 6. If you're late, door's locked. Lucy's face lit up, but she caught herself. She nodded slowly, biting her bottom lip to hide the smile that wanted to explode across her face. Yes, ma'am, I will. Joanne turned her back, already moving toward the ovens. Leave your name and number on that pad before you go, she said over her shoulder. I don't have a phone. Joanne stopped for a second, then shrugged. Write it anyway. The oven beeped. Joanne didn't turn as Lucy slipped back out into the street, the bell above the door chiming once more before falling silent. She moved to the window, watching the girl disappear around the corner. That same oversized backpack bouncing with each step. The wind picked up a little and leaves skittered down the sidewalk like they were racing to catch up with her. Joanne turned back to table 4. The scone was still there, still warm, still untouched. She sat down across from it for the first time in months, and for the briefest moment, she could almost hear a child's laugh echoing from the past, like sugar melting on the tongue, sweet, fleeting, impossible to hold. The morning shift had just begun to stir at Emma's bakery. A few neighborhood regulars had wandered in, Mrs. Hampton in her floral scarf and Walker Mr. Lee from the print shop down the street, grabbing his usual double espresso and toasted rye. The bell above the door tinkled softly every few minutes, punctuating the rhythm of ovens humming and trays sliding into place. Behind the counter, Joanne moved with a quiet grace, even when her joints protested. She hadn't looked back toward the door since the strange little girl left, but her mind lingered there. She'd had dozens of kids come and go over the years. Interns, summer help, college kids looking for part-time work. They always wanted a paycheck, rarely stayed long enough to learn the smell of dough that was alive versus dead. But this one, Lucy, there was something about the way she had looked at the flour-dusted tiles, the way her eyes had latched onto table 4 like she was trying to see through time. Joanne turned toward the back to pull another tray from the oven when she heard the bell again. She didn't have to look to know who it was. The girl's footsteps were soft, uncertain. I'm not late, Lucy said, breathless. It's still early. Joanne didn't respond immediately. She slid the golden croissants onto the wire rack, steam rising in gentle curls. You said 6, Lucy added. It's 5:58. Joanne turned slowly. You said you didn't have a phone. I borrowed one, Lucy shrugged. Neighbor. I set 3 alarms. Joanne's eyes narrowed slightly. And the shoes. Lucy lifted one foot slightly, showing clean sneakers. Change them. These have rubber soles. The silence between them held like a tight thread. Then Joanne stepped aside. You want to bake? She asked. Lucy nodded. Then we'll see. She gestured toward the sink. Wash your hands. Elbows too. Tie your hair back. Then come here. Lucy didn't waste a second. She moved with precision, like someone who had watched others do this many times and memorized the motions. Joanne watched, noting every flick of the wrist, every cautious glance. They stood side by side at the stainless steel counter. Now flour canister, open scales, set bowls gleaming in the light from the overhead pendant lamp. Joanne reached into the drawer and pulled out 3 small canisters. Tell me what these are, she said, placing them in a row. Lucy hesitated for only a moment before she unscrewed the lids one by one, holding them beneath her nose. This one's instant yeast, she said. Smells cleaner, finer granules. She moved to the second. Active dry. You can see the difference, it's grittier, needs proofing in warm water first. Then the third, this one's fresh yeast. It's more earthy, kind of sweet and sharp at the same time, but it doesn't last long. 2 weeks, maybe. Joanne didn't say a word. Lucy continued, emboldened. Fresh is best for sourdoughs and long ferments, but you have to store it right. Too much moisture and it dies. Still nothing from Joanne, just that same unreadable expression. Lucy fidgeted, then added, I use dry most of the time because fresh is harder to find, and I don't bake enough for bulk. Joanne raised an eyebrow. You bake? Lucy blinked. I try. At home. With a toaster oven mostly. It's not great, but I keep a journal. I record my ratios, hydration levels, how long I ferment. I've been working on my own cinnamon roll formula for 3 months. A tiny smirk crept at the corner of Joanne's mouth, though she turned to hide it. You know what bakers are? She asked after a pause. Lucy looked puzzled. Joanne didn't wait. Liars and scientists. They pretend it's all love and heart and family, but in truth it's measurement, time, temperature, math. And no one forgives your mistakes. Not dough, not fire. Lucy nodded solemnly. I know. Joanne finally faced her. You're not working here. Not yet. You observe. You sweep. You take notes. If you get in the way, you're gone. Lucy stood straighter. Yes, ma'am. Joanne turned to grab a mixing bowl and tossed it lightly onto the scale. We're doing blueberry muffins first. Watch the bloom on the berries. They burst too early. You're over-mixing. Lucy pulled a notepad from her jacket. The cover was torn and soft from use. Joanne glanced at it. You weren't bluffing. No, ma'am, Lucy said. They worked in silence for a while, Joanne moving like a conductor, Lucy shadowing each step with a kind of reverence. The smell of butter, sugar, and zest filled the room. As Joanne poured batter into the muffin tins, Lucy leaned closer. That scent, that's cardamom, right? Not cinnamon. Joanne didn't answer. She simply lifted one side of the spice rack and tilted it so Lucy could read the label for herself. Lucy smiled faintly and scribbled in her pad. Time passed gently. Customers came and went. Joanne gave Lucy the occasional glance, watching how the girl scribbled notes, how she hovered near the ovens like someone drawn to a sacred warmth. Then, as they stood at the counter waiting for the next batch to bake, Lucy looked over at table 4. That chair, she said quietly. Joanne didn't look up. Lucy pointed. The one by the window has a cushion that's a little flatter than the others. Joanne's eyes stayed fixed on her bowl. Is it reserved for someone? Lucy asked. Still no response. I noticed it yesterday. The plate, the fork, the same pastry, same spot. Joanne's hands stopped moving. She set down the whisk. Lucy said quickly, I didn't mean to pry. It just looked like someone used to sit there. Joanne lifted her eyes slowly. You asked too many questions, she said. Lucy shrank a little. Sorry. But Joanne didn't seem angry. If anything, she looked tired. The silence was thicker now. It stretched between them like rising dough, alive, unpredictable. That chair used to be someone's favorite, Joanne said finally. Her voice was quiet but steady. A long time ago. Lucy nodded. Mine's the windowsill at the library, that spot where the sun hits in the afternoon. I go there when I need to think. Joanne didn't say anything. The oven timer beeped. Joanne turned away, opening the door to release a golden tray of muffins. As she pulled them out, Lucy spoke again. Her voice was softer now, more hesitant. You don't have to answer this. But, do you miss the person who sat there? Joanne set the tray on the cooling rack. The steam curled upward like a slow, reluctant ghost. Yes, she said, and then she said nothing more. Lucy didn't push. Instead, she moved toward the broom, leaning against the pantry door, and began sweeping quietly, head down, like she understood something important had been shared and that it was enough for now. The bell above the door rang again, and Joanne turned to greet a new customer. But in the corner of her eye, she watched Lucy sweeping flour from the tiles like she had been doing it for years. And when she turned back toward the muffins, she saw the empty chair again. Still empty, but somehow just a little less lonely than before. The smell of scorched sugar always brought her back. Even now, 3 years and 11 days later, Joanne couldn't walk past the high shelf where she once kept the caramel trays without tasting the memory of that moment. Burnt, bitter, acrid, just like the words that had filled the room that afternoon. Words that had never been spoken before and never taken back. The memory came uninvited like it always did. A sharp pulse beneath the skin, a fire in the chest. It was late October then. The wind had blown hard against the front windows, rattling the glass like someone trying to claw their way in. Emily had stood just inside the threshold, one hand still gripping the handle of her leather portfolio, the other clenched at her side. Her voice had been steady, but her eyes, God, those eyes were already full of storm. "I'm not asking you to hand me a trust fund," she had said. "I'm asking for an investment." Joanne had kept her hands busy. That was always her strategy. Hands in motion, mind at peace. She was dusting flour from a tray of bread loaves when she answered. "This isn't about money." Emily took a step closer. "Of course it is." "No," Joanne replied, "it's about legacy. About the fact that you don't understand what this place means." Emily's mouth twisted. "You mean what it means to you." Joanne finally looked up. Her hands stopped moving. "I built this bakery from the ground up. Your father and I put everything we had into it." "I know, Mom. You remind me every time I bring up change." "It's not change I'm afraid of," Joanne said. "It's erasure. You want to sell Emmas to strangers, to men in suits who've never needed dough in their life, so you can build an app that tells people where to buy gluten-free croissants." Emily's voice cracked then, even as it rose. "It's a food sustainability platform, and it's mine, my vision, my work. You could build that without this place." "I don't want just an idea," Emily shouted. "I want to make something real, just like you did. But I need capital, I need you." Joanne had felt it rising in her chest then, that slow, suffocating pressure. But she pushed it down. "This place isn't just flour and ovens, Emily. It's our story, your childhood, the recipes your grandmother passed to me, the walls you painted animals on when you were 6. That corner," she pointed at table 4. "That's where you wrote your first essay about cinnamon rolls and friendship. Do you remember that?" But Emily's face was tight with rage. "You don't want me to succeed," she said. "You want me to stay in the past. You want me to fit into this perfect picture of your bakery, your daughter, your world. That's not fair." "No," Emily whispered, voice cracking now. "What's not fair is being told every day that I'm not good enough unless I become you." Joanne stepped back. The words landed like a slap. "I never said that." Emily didn't wait for more. "You didn't have to," she said. "You wore it on your face every time I talked about my dreams." Joanne opened her mouth, searching for something, anything to hold her daughter back. But Emily turned. "Forget it," she said. "Forget the investment. Forget me asking. Forget this whole damn conversation." And then, almost as an afterthought, spoken with a coldness Joanne had never heard in her daughter before, Emily added, "You never believed in me anyway." The door slammed behind her like a closing casket. Joanne had stood there alone, the wind still rattling the window panes, her fingers trembling over the edge of the counter. An hour later, she sat in the middle of the bakery, staring down at a torn contract on the table. She had ripped it in two with her own hands, shredding through the bold-faced offer from some Silicon Valley investor who'd wanted to buy Emma's for 5 times its market value. She had torn through the lines like they were poison. But the paper didn't bleed. Only she did. Tears had fallen silently onto the signature block, smearing the ink. No one was there to see. No one was ever there. Not anymore. The memory snapped in half like a brittle sugar shard. Back in the present, Joanne was standing at the prep counter again, watching Lucy scoop flour into a mixing bowl. The girl's ponytail was slightly off-center, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows like a tiny soldier ready for battle. She was focused intensely, so tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth. Joanne turned to check the timer. Just as she did, there was a crash. Metal against tile, the screech of a tray sliding, a sharp, wet splatter. Then silence. Joanne's head whipped around. Lucy stood frozen, both hands raised in helpless apology. At her feet, a tray of blueberry scones lay upside down on the floor, crumbled, flattened, destroyed. I'm so sorry, Lucy stammered. I was trying to... I didn't mean. Joanne felt it all rising again, the heat, the pressure, the taste of ash in the back of her throat. What did I tell you? She barked. You don't touch the trays until I say. I thought you said. I don't care what you thought. This isn't a game, Lucy. This isn't your kitchen at home with your little toaster oven. The words were sharp, too sharp. She saw it land in the girl's chest like a nail hammered straight through the center. Lucy flinched. Her lip trembled. She looked down at the scones like they were her own broken bones. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I can pay for it. I'll sweep. I'll mop. I don't need your sweeping, Joanne snapped. I need someone who listens, who respects this place. If you can't even hold a tray. Lucy took a step back. Then another. I shouldn't have come, she said, voice cracking. Joanne's breath hitched. Her hands shook. She wanted to pull the words back, but they were already hanging in the air like smoke. Lucy turned and ran toward the door. The bell rang, and then she was gone. The bakery fell into a sudden suffocating silence. Joanne didn't move, couldn't move. Her chest ached, her throat tight. She looked down at the crumpled pastries on the floor. Blueberries smeared like ink blots on the tile. It looked like a battlefield, like something sacred had been destroyed. She picked up the tray with trembling fingers, set it on the counter, and reached for a cloth. She wiped the floor slowly, and then she turned, walked toward table 4. The plate was still there, the fork, the napkin. She reached for the scone she had baked that morning, the one she had placed there as always. Her hand shook, but she didn't move it. Instead, she sat down slowly in the opposite chair, the one she never touched. For a long moment, she simply looked at the empty cushion across from her. The cushion that had once held Emily's tiny frame, that had flattened beneath years of eager weight. She reached out and slid the scone slightly to the center. Still warm, still whole. Her fingers brushed the edge of the plate, and for the first time in a long while, Joanne whispered aloud into the stillness, I'm sorry too. The streets had begun to quiet. That in-between hour when the early crowd had already faded and the lunch rush hadn't yet begun cast a kind of hush over the town. Joanne locked the bakery door behind her with one sharp twist, the bell inside giving a lonely final chime. Her apron was still dusted with flour, her hands still smelled of cardamom and yeast, but her mind was elsewhere. Lucy's face lingered behind her eyes. The way the girl had looked at her, startled, heartbroken, embarrassed. There was something too familiar in it, too haunting. Joanne had snapped, and she knew it. She had watched Lucy bolt out the door with the same quick, wounded steps she'd seen once before, on a different day from a different girl, with the same eyes. She walked fast, passing the florist's window, without glancing in, crossing the street with purpose. She wasn't entirely sure where she was going, but her body seemed to know. It led her past the post office, past the rusted iron bench where the old men smoked cigars in the afternoon, past the faded mural of the town's founding fathers, into the small park behind the courthouse. And there, tucked beneath the drooping branches of a willow tree, sat Lucy, alone, knees pulled to her chest, shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to disappear inside herself. Her hands picked idly at a loose thread on her sleeve, and though her face was mostly hidden, Joanne could see the faint shimmer of tears in the sunlight. She approached slowly, careful not to startle her. Lucy didn't move, not until Joanne sat down beside her, the bench creaking beneath the weight of guilt and time. I didn't mean to break anything, Lucy said softly, not looking up. It just slipped. Joanne nodded. I know. A silence stretched between them, long and taut. Then Lucy spoke again, her voice a whisper barely there. I wasn't honest with you. Joanne turned her head slightly. About what? The girl's lips trembled. About who I am? Joanne waited. Lucy swallowed hard. Emily. Emily's my aunt. She's not just someone I know, she's my foster mom. She took me in 2 years ago. I call her my mom now, but legally she's... Joanne's breath caught. I didn't say anything before because I thought maybe you'd make me leave, or not give me a chance. I wanted to be here on my own. Earn it, not just be her kid. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. Joanne didn't speak. Couldn't. The name hung in the air between them like a match struck in darkness. Emily. The sound of it from someone else's mouth. Someone so small, so earnest, it pierced something inside her. Like an arrow slipping through old armor. She turned away, blinking hard. Lucy pulled her sleeves over her hands. She's scared of coming back. She passes by the bakery sometimes, walks the long way just to catch a glimpse. But she never comes in. She says it would be selfish, that she ruined everything. Joanne closed her eyes. Lucy pressed on more quietly now. She still bakes, every weekend. Not a lot. But sometimes I wake up and she's just sitting at the oven holding a muffin tin and staring like it's a picture frame or something. Like she's trying to remember something she can't quite get back. Joanne felt her throat tightening, a slow constriction, like grief curling its fingers around her windpipe. She talks about you, Lucy said, but not out loud. Just little things, like when she sprinkles sugar on top, she says, your grandma always did this. Or when she kneads dough, she whispers stuff like, you have to feel it breathe. I know she misses you. A long breath escaped Joanne's lips. Her hands trembled on her lap. I thought she hated me, she said quietly. Lucy looked up, eyes shining. She thought you hated her. Joanne let out a bitter laugh that caught in her chest like a sob. We're two stubborn women. I guess that runs in the family. Lucy gave a small smile. It does. Joanne turned finally, meeting the girl's gaze. I shouldn't have yelled at you. It's okay, Lucy said. No, Joanne insisted. It's not. You were trying. You didn't deserve that. Lucy nodded, then hesitated. Why do you still put the scone on the table? Joanne stared off at the willow leaves swaying above them. Because I don't know how to stop. Another silence fell. This one gentler. Like both of them were sitting in the stillness of something being rebuilt plank by plank. Joanne reached out slowly and brushed a strand of hair from Lucy's forehead. Her fingers lingered there for a moment, just long enough to mean something. I'm glad you came, she whispered. Lucy's eyes filled again, but she didn't look away. Joanne looked down at her watch. It's not too late to finish the morning batch, she said. Lucy's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Joanne stood slowly brushing flour off her apron. If you're still interested in baking. I could use a good note-taker, someone who listens, someone who pays attention to the way yeast smells when it's ready. Lucy stood too cautiously hopeful. Really? Joanne nodded. Come early, 6 sharp. We'll start with brioche. That one separates the curious from the committed. Lucy's face lit up, but then her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Will it be weird? With you knowing who my mom is. Joanne didn't flinch. Hard, she said. Yes, weird maybe, but not impossible. She smiled softly, then added, We'll figure it out, one fold at a time. Lucy gave a small laugh, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. As they walked back toward the bakery side by side, the sun peeked through the clouds overhead, casting warm light through the budding trees. Joanne glanced down at the girl beside her, and for the first time in 3 years something in her chest loosened, not all the way, but enough to let something else in. Maybe not forgiveness, but something close. The bakery breathed differently when it was quiet. Not empty, but still. In those early hours before the bustle returned, the hum of the ovens and the soft crackle of heat stretching through metal felt almost like a heartbeat, rhythmic, alive, whispering through the air like a memory being kept warm. Joanne stood behind the counter in her faded apron, watching Lucy roll dough in her small hands. There was flour on the girl's cheeks, a smudge near her eyebrow, and streaks on her elbows where she'd leaned too eagerly into the mixing bowl. But she wasn't messy. She was focused, intent. You're folding, not strangling it, Joanne said gently. Lucy let out a laugh. Sorry. It's not a snowball. Gentle, like you're convincing it to trust you. Lucy slowed her movement. Press, turn, fold, pause. Joanne nodded. Good. Now again. Let it breathe between folds. The heat from the oven wafted toward them in gentle sighs, carrying with it the scent of rising butter and yeast. Outside, the town still yawned in sleep. Inside, the world felt smaller, closer, a cocoon of warmth and flower and cautious hope. They worked together in silence for a while, Joanne moving like a conductor, her rhythm precise, her movements clean. Lucy followed, hesitant at first, then more certain with each pass. "Is it weird to say this is the most peace I've felt in weeks?" Lucy said, suddenly, not looking up. Joanne raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. "I mean, it's quiet, but not lonely quiet, more like memory quiet." Joanne studied the girl, but her hands didn't stop. Lucy paused. "She used to say that." Joanne turned slightly. "Who?" "My mom, Emily." "That name again?" Lucy glanced up. "She used to bake late, really late, like after I'd already gone to bed. Sometimes I'd wake up to the smell and sneak out of my room. She didn't scold me or send me back, just let me sit there at the counter and watch." Joanne's hands slowed. She wasn't always saying much, but sometimes she'd talk to the dough like it was listening, said it needed stories to rise right. Joanne exhaled a long, unsteady breath. She always talked to her ingredients, even as a kid. Lucy smiled faintly. "One time I asked her why she was sad. She didn't answer, but she just pointed to this picture she kept near the oven. It was old and a little wrinkled. You could barely see the faces in it. But she said, 'That's me, and her. We used to laugh over burnt biscuits.'" Joanne felt her spine stiffen. She said "her" like it was someone gone, not someone who lived 5 blocks away. Joanne swallowed the heat from the oven, making her throat drier than usual. She'd stare at it for hours sometimes, Lucy went on, like she was waiting for it to speak back. Joanne stepped back from the dough and turned toward the hallway leading to the stairwell. "Stay here," she said. Lucy blinked. "Did I say something wrong?" But Joanne was already walking away, her steps steady but heavy, as if her feet remembered a different rhythm, one they hadn't danced in years. She climbed the creaking wooden stairs to the narrow attic tucked above the bakery. The door stuck as it always had, and gave a reluctant groan when she pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light piercing through the small, round window. The air smelled like cedar and thyme. She stepped inside, ducking beneath a slanted beam, and crossed to the far wall where an old trunk sat worn at the edges, one leather strap missing. She opened it slowly. Inside were relics of a life paused. Old aprons, a box of Emily's school projects, a papier-mâché cupcake with glitter glue and pipe cleaner sprinkles, a drawing of Joanne with a giant wooden spoon and a lopsided chef's hat, and beneath it all a small wooden box, the kind people used to store recipe cards and love letters. Joanne pulled it out and opened the lid with trembling fingers. There it was, the photo, faded edges curled but still intact. Emily was maybe 7, her hair in crooked pigtails, her cheeks dusted with flour. She sat on the counter beside the oven leg, swinging eyes bright with mischief. Joanne stood behind her, laughing, her hands mid-clap, caught in a puff of flour that hung in the air like snowfall. A frozen moment. Before the disappointment, before the shouting, before the silence, she brushed a finger across the image, clearing a streak of dust from her own smile. Her hand shook. She sat down slowly on an old wooden crate, the box resting on her knees, the photo in both hands now. The ache in her chest returned not like a sharp stab, but like something long embedded that never fully healed. There had been so many nights she almost picked up the phone. So many mornings she baked that same scone and told herself she didn't care if Emily ever came back, that she was the one who turned her back first. But none of it was true. And holding that photo now, she realized just how much of her life was still living in that one image. She heard the bell downstairs. Not the front door, the kitchen bell. And the smell, warm, sweet, nostalgic, rose into the attic, riding the draft like a whisper from the past. Joanne wiped the corner of her eye with the sleeve of her cardigan, then tucked the photo back into the wooden box, closing the lid with a soft click. She rose, carrying the box with her, and made her way back down the stairs. When she reached the kitchen, the scent of freshly baked scones wrapped around her like an old embrace. Lucy stood at the counter holding a tray with oven mitts too big for her hands, her face lit by the golden glow of triumph. "They didn't burn," she said, cheeks flushed. "I followed your notes, checked the timing, watched the bloom. I didn't stir too much after the berries went in." Joanne set the box on the table beside her and stepped closer. She picked up one of the scones, held it to her nose, inhaled, then broke it open. Steam curled from the center. The dough was soft, structured berries intact. She took a bite, closed her eyes. When she opened them, Lucy was watching her with something close to reverence. "You're a good student," Joanne said. Lucy smiled wide and proud, and for a moment the ghost of the past stood still watching them both. Not intruding, not wailing, just present. A part of the room like the warmth of the oven or the worn tile beneath their feet. Joanne reached for the wooden box, opened the lid, and carefully pulled out the photo. She turned it toward Lucy. "Is this the one she kept by the oven?" she asked. Lucy's eyes widened. "That's it," she whispered. "Exactly that one." Joanne stared at it a moment longer. Then for the first time in years she smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't loud, but it was real, and it held a promise neither of them needed to say aloud. The bakery was quiet again. It always seemed to fall into silence more quickly now, as though the walls themselves were tired of speaking into the void. The oven's hum faded into the background like a memory reluctant to leave. The faint smell of lemon zest and yeast still lingered in the air, but Joanne didn't notice. She was seated behind the counter, her elbows on the edge of the flour-streaked wood, her hands clasped loosely together as her eyes stared off past the glass door. Her mind wasn't in the present. It hadn't been for hours, ever since she held that photo in her hand, ever since Lucy's voice echoed in her ears about Emily baking alone, whispering to memories something in her had shifted. Not melted, not broken, shifted. A hinge turning, a door she'd nailed shut groaning on old rusted screws. Joanne reached across the counter for her phone. The screen blinked to life. Her contact list hadn't been updated in years, and yet there it was tucked beneath the E section, untouched, Emily Home. She stared at the name for a long time. Her thumb hovered. Then she tapped. The phone rang once, then again, then a third time. Her breath caught. A fourth. And finally, "This number has been disconnected or is no longer in service. If you believe this is an error." Joanne dropped the phone onto the counter like it had burned her hand. The robotic voice kept talking until the screen dimmed and the silence returned. She rose from her chair, paced once toward the prep area, then doubled back. She opened the drawer beside the register, rummaging through old notes and faded receipts until she found a yellowed address book, the kind she hadn't used in a decade. She flipped through the pages. Bakersfield, Delilah, Henderson, Klein. She paused at Marshall Dana, an old friend, one of the few who'd ever known the inside of her life. Joanne tapped her name into the phone and waited. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then, "Hello, Dana." "Joanne." Joanne exhaled slowly as if she'd been underwater. "My God, how long has it been?" Dana's voice was still sharp, still familiar. "Too long," Joanne replied. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue." "Don't be silly, you okay?" There was a pause. "I'm trying to find Emily," Joanne said softly. The line went quiet for a breath. "I thought you two weren't talking." "We weren't," Joanne admitted, "but I heard she might be back." There was a rustle on the other end, a shift in tone. "Yeah. She moved into that old duplex by Willow Creek. Just last month. My cousin lives across from her. Said she keeps to herself mostly." Joanne sat down slowly. "So she really is back?" "Seems so." Joanne stared at the bakery door again, heart drumming low and uneven in her chest. "I thought she'd never come back," she murmured. "Maybe she thought the same about you." Joanne blinked. "What do you mean?" Dana's voice was gentler now. "Maybe she thought you wouldn't want her here. Maybe she thought the town only had room for one baker." Joanne looked down at her hands, calloused and flour-etched. "I didn't want her to leave," she whispered. "I just wanted her to understand." She was always stubborn, Joe. Joanne gave a faint, dry chuckle. "She gets it honest." They sat in that quiet for a moment. Then Dana said, "You gonna go see her?" Joanne didn't answer right away. Instead, her eyes moved toward the glass display case where blueberry scones glistened under warm lights. "I don't know if she wants to see me." "She might not," Dana replied. "But that's not what you're asking, is it?" Joanne closed her eyes. The question sat there unanswered. She hung up a few minutes later, thanked Dana for the time, promised they'd get coffee soon, in that way people do when they don't know if they'll ever follow through. And then she walked out of the bakery. No apron, no basket, no routine. Just her coat, the cold air, and a purpose she didn't yet fully understand. She didn't walk directly to Willow Creek. Her legs had a mind of their own. They carried her down Maple Lane, first the street where Emily rode her first bike, where she skinned her knees and came running home, cheeks flushed not with pain, but with fury that she'd fallen in front of the neighbor boy. Then to Preston Avenue, where the bookstore used to be, the one that had sold spiral notebooks and glitter pens, and where Emily had begged for every sticker pack shaped like cupcakes. She passed by the old ice cream shop, now boarded up where they'd spent rainy Sundays, eating banana splits by the window, pretending the storm was applause for their bravery. Everything was quieter now, smaller. Or maybe it was Joanne who had changed size. The past lived in these streets like ghosts, without names visible only to those who knew where to look. She stopped outside the duplex just 2 blocks from the bakery. The curtains in one window fluttered gently as if someone had just passed by. Joanne didn't step forward, didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She just stood across the street, heart pacing, memory spiraling, and then she turned and walked away. She wasn't ready, not yet. Maybe soon. Back at the bakery, the sun had begun to set. That golden hour light filtered in through the windows, stretching long shadows across the worn wood floor. Joanne didn't turn on the overheads. She let the dusk settle. She poured herself a cup of tea, cradled it in her hands, and walked slowly to table 4. She sat. The chair creaked the same way it always had. The place setting remained untouched. She reached forward and straightened the napkin by habit. Across from her, the empty seat watched like it always did, silent waiting. Joanne stared at it for a long while. The photo of Emily still sitting in the wooden box upstairs. Her daughter's real presence somewhere just a few blocks away. She leaned in slightly, the steam from the tea fogging the edge of her glasses, and she whispered into the stillness, "You're out there, aren't you?" No one answered. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like breath, held, waiting, listening. They didn't speak much on the walk. Lucy led the way, her steps quicker than usual, her frame small against the vast evening around them. Joanne followed a few paces behind, her coat drawn tight, her hands stuffed into her pockets, not because of the cold, but because they didn't know where else to go. Her fingers kept curling and uncurling as though something lived beneath her skin, something restless, an ancient fear maybe, or memory. The streets narrowed as they moved, shifting from the polished storefronts of the town's center to older blocks with crumbling paint and cracked pavement. They turned into an alley, then another, weaving past sagging chain-link fences and crooked utility poles. The scent of bread and sugar faded, replaced by the must of concrete old rain rust. It was just past dusk. Street lamps buzzed dimly overhead, flickering every few feet. Lucy paused at a narrow gate covered in vines and unlatched it. "This way," she murmured, not turning back. Joanne followed. The path led them to a low-rise building, 4 stories, flat roof, stucco walls stained with age. One window had a curtain drawn haphazardly, half tucked in. On the second floor, a potted plant sat on the ledge like it was trying to breathe through concrete. Joanne took all of this in silently. "This is it," Lucy said, reaching for the buzzer. But instead of pressing it, she pulled a key from her coat pocket. "She gave me one," she explained, barely audible. They entered the building and the hallway swallowed them whole. It smelled faintly of floor polish and overcooked cabbage. A flickering light overhead cast the corridor in alternating shadow and dull gold. The carpet beneath their feet was worn threadbare in places, showing seams like old wounds. They climbed the stairs. Joanne's heart thudded with each step, not just in her chest, but in her throat, her wrists, her knees. Every inch of her was aware. When they reached the 3rd floor, Lucy stopped outside a green door with a brass number that had lost its shine. She looked up at Joanne. "She doesn't know I brought you," she said. Joanne blinked. Should I not?" "She needs to see you," Lucy said. "She just doesn't know how much." Lucy turned the key slowly and opened the door. The apartment was small. 2 rooms, a kitchenette. The floor creaked under their feet. The smell of something sweet apple maybe lingered faintly in the air. There were no overhead lights on, just a lamp in the corner, its light low and amber, and on the far wall above a simple wooden table was a photograph, framed carefully, hung with intention. Joanne froze. It was the same photo, the one she had retrieved from the attic, her and Emily, beside the old oven. Her hands mid-clap, Emily's face lit up with flour and joy. The flower cloud frozen in motion like laughter made visible. Joanne stared at it, her breath caught. And then from the hallway to the left a shadow moved. She didn't hear footsteps, just the shifting of weight. A presence stepping forward, careful and unsure. Emily appeared at the edge of the doorway. She didn't speak. She stood there backlit by the hall, her body half in shadow, half illuminated by the lamp's tired glow. Her hair was longer, darker, pulled into a low bun, her frame thinner, paler. But her eyes, those eyes were the same. Joanne didn't move. Neither did Emily. They just looked. 3 years collapsed into silence. No greetings, no accusations, no explanations. Just two women standing in the residue of what once was. Lucy stepped backward slowly, her face tilted down as though afraid to interrupt whatever fragile thread had woven itself between them. She didn't speak. She didn't even look back. She just walked to the door, opened it quietly, and slipped out, leaving it gently ajar. Inside, the silence stretched again. Joanne took a breath. Emily mirrored her. Their eyes stayed locked. Questions, apologies, defiance, longing, all there, all unspoken, all roaring beneath the stillness, like a storm behind glass. Joanne stepped forward once, then stopped. Emily's fingers twitched at her sides, curling slightly, but she didn't retreat. Joanne's voice, when it finally came, was raw with time. "I didn't think you'd still have that photo." Emily blinked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Joanne took another step. The apartment seemed to pulse with tension, old grief, quiet hope. "I kept mine," Joanne continued, "upstairs, in a box I swore I'd never open again." Emily looked away for a second, just a blink, and then met her mother's eyes once more. There was a flash of something there, not anger, not yet forgiveness, but something between. "I tried to forget it," Emily said finally, her voice hoarse. "But I couldn't." Joanne nodded. "Me neither." Silence again. Joanne glanced around. The kitchen counters were clean. A mug sat next to the sink, a folded dish towel. There was a small vase with wildflowers beside the lamp, simple, tender. She looked back at her daughter. "You look tired," Joanne said without judgment. Emily's laugh was small, almost painful. "Motherhood'll do that." Joanne's chest tightened. "Lucy's a good kid. She's everything," Emily whispered. They stood like that for a long time, until Joanne finally said, "I didn't come here to fix everything. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Emily said. "You're here." That was it. The weight of 3 years, the ache, the silence, the absence. It all hovered between them, acknowledged, unfinished, but no longer unspoken. No embrace, no tears. Just eyes meeting across a quiet room filled with the scent of apples, the glow of a single lamp, and the presence of a picture that neither one of them had the heart to take down. And somehow in that silence everything began again. They sat across from each other, not quite in the living room, not quite in the kitchen, just in the space between where distance turns into confession. The old table between them bore 2 chipped mugs, one filled with lukewarm tea, the other untouched. The light from the floor lamp still poured across the framed photo on the wall, casting a faint shadow between the 2 women, as if to remind them this too has weight. Emily leaned back in her chair. Her arms were crossed, but not in defiance, more like a brace against whatever words were waiting to come out of her. Joanne hadn't touched her tea. She sat straighter than usual, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes steady but rimmed with a kind of rawness that betrayed her composure. Neither of them had spoken since Lucy left the apartment, and then Emily exhaled, slow and shaky. "You know," she said, voice brittle, "for the longest time I thought if I just got far enough away I wouldn't feel it anymore." Joanne looked up. "Feel what?" "That stupid chair," Emily said, a bitter laugh slipping out. "That damn table 4. Every time I closed my eyes it was still there, still waiting, still mocking me." Joanne's breath caught. Emily kept going. "You never said it out loud, but it was always clear Emma's came first. Before me, before us." "That's not fair," Joanne whispered. Emily scoffed. "Isn't it? Every birthday, every school recital, every college visit. If it clashed with inventory day or a holiday order, I was the one who got rescheduled." "I was doing my best," Joanne said. "I was keeping the lights on." "You were preserving a shrine," Emily said, eyes narrowing. "But it was never mine. I could bake better than half your staff by the time I was 15. I could run numbers, talk to suppliers, build a website. And still, every time I pitched a new idea, you shut it down like I was trying to burn the place to the ground." Joanne leaned forward, voice trembling. "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I let go even a little, you'd leave. that I'd lose both the bakery and you. Emily laughed sharp and bitter. And in the end, you got to keep your bakery. But you still lost me. Silence. Joanne swallowed hard. Her throat burned. I didn't know how to show it, she said finally. The pride, the fear, the love. I thought if I held on tight enough to what we built, it would keep us together. Emily shook her head. We didn't build it. You and Dad did. I was just the kid underfoot. That's not true. I never beat the bakery, Emily said. Her voice cracked. I competed with it every day of my life, and I always lost. Joanne stood. Her hands trembled as she took a slow step away from the table, then turned back, eyes brimming. You were never in a competition with Emma's, she said. You were never a threat. You were the reason I kept that place open after your father died. You were the only reason I got out of bed some mornings. I didn't need you to become the bakery. I needed you to just be my daughter. Emily's mouth parted, but no words came. Joanne's voice softened, strained, but full of quiet ache. But I was too scared to say it. Too scared to lose you by being honest. Emily blinked hard. Joanne sat again slowly. I kept table 4 open for 3 years, she said. Every single day I put a scone down just in case you walked through the door. Not for the bakery, not for some poetic gesture, for me. So I could believe I hadn't destroyed everything. Emily looked away. Joanne studied her. Lucy told me you bake at night. Emily's shoulders stiffened. She said you talk to the dough. Joanne added with a faint, bittersweet smile, that you whisper stories to it. Emily shrugged, barely emotion, habit. Joanne's eyes glistened. I remember you used to pretend the batter had ears. You'd scold it when it lumped. Emily let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. Still does. The quiet after was long, heavy. Joanne took a breath. I heard you came back to town a month ago. I didn't plan to, Emily said. My last job collapsed. The startup failed. Investors pulled out. I couldn't make rent in the city. Joanne winced. You never called. I didn't know what I'd say. Joanne nodded. And Lucy, Emily's voice softened. She came through the system. Bright, damaged, tougher than she looks. Reminded me of myself, which was probably dangerous. I didn't think I'd be any good at it, being someone's safe place. But she needed a person, and I needed someone to believe in me. Joanne's lips quivered. You gave her what I couldn't give you. No, Emily said firmly. You gave me everything I ever needed to survive. I just didn't know how to use it until someone else needed it too. They sat in that revelation. Joanne reached for her mug, finally held it with both hands, though she didn't sip. I kept the bakery, she said softly, because I needed one thing that still had your fingerprints on it. Emily's eyes darted to the floor. I thought you kept it to spite me. No, Joanne whispered. I kept it to remember. Emily stared at her mother, the silence roaring between them. And then she shook her head. I'm not coming back to the bakery, she said. Joanne nodded slowly, as if she already knew. I'm not asking you to, she said. Emily sat back. You're not? No, Joanne said. I just want to be part of your world again. Whatever that looks like. Wherever it is. Even if it's nowhere near ovens or pastries or window displays. Emily stared at her for a long time, and for once the tension in her shoulders eased. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. For the first time in years they sat together, not as adversaries, not as guilt and anger, but simply as two people fractured, flawed, blood-bound, and bruised, trying to find the space between the ruins where something living could still grow. Neither one of them knew if it was forgiveness, but it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings don't need words. They only need to be allowed. The kitchen was small, but it felt full. Not crowded, just alive. The way warmth fills a room on a cold night. The way laughter echoes louder when the silence has lasted too long. Emily moved first. She stood up, hesitated for half a second, then glanced at her mother. You hungry? She asked. Joanne blinked. I could eat. Emily nodded towards the fridge. It's not much. I've got some pasta, garlic, half an onion that probably wishes it had a partner. Joanne stood, letting a soft smile rise to her lips. That's more than enough. There was no ceremony in the way they moved around each other, but there was carefulness. The kind of cautious choreography between two people learning each other's rhythms again after years apart. Emily retrieved a saucepan. Joanne found a wooden spoon. The burner clicked to life beneath a blue flame. The scent of olive oil began to sizzle. Lucy reappeared moments later, peeking around the doorway. "You stayed," she said to Joanne, wide-eyed. "I did," Joanne replied. "Your garlic won me over." Lucy grinned and stepped into the room, shoulders relaxing as if some unspoken weight had lifted. "I'll set the table," she offered, moving toward the cabinet with practiced ease. Emily raised an eyebrow. "When did you learn to find the forks? I might have watched you do it about 1,000 times, Lucy said. "I'm observant." Emily shook her head but smiled. Joanne watched them, the way they fit into each other's routines, the small gestures of a family already formed. It tugged at something deep inside her, half ache, half awe. "Tell me," Joanne said, "how long has she been sneaking into the kitchen at night?" Emily snorted. "Too long." Lucy grinned. "Since the first cinnamon roll, remember the one that exploded like a science experiment?" "Oh, that mess," Emily groaned, mock dramatic. "I'm still finding sugar in the grout." "It was worth it," Lucy said. "You said it yourself. Failure teaches flavor." Joanne's eyes widened. "You said that?" Emily flushed slightly. "Maybe once." Joanne chuckled. "You used to mock me when I said that." "Yeah, well," Emily muttered, "I guess you imprinted me more than I realized." Joanne stirred the pan of garlic and onions, now sizzling in oil. She added the noodles Emily handed her, then grabbed a spoon and tasted the sauce simmering on the back burner. She paused. "You salted this right?" she murmured. Emily smirked. "Some things I learned from the best." The atmosphere softened further, like old music rediscovered on a dusty vinyl. Time no longer stood between them, it merely sat off to the side, watching quietly. As the three of them sat around the table, the flickering overhead bulb casting long shadows on the walls, Lucy cradled her bowl in both hands. "This is better than any restaurant," she declared. "That's just because you didn't cook it," Emily teased. "I helped. You set the table." "Still counts." They laughed, all three of them. The kind of laughter that spills from a room when no one's holding their breath anymore. Halfway through the meal, Joanne set down her fork and looked across the table. Her eyes met Emily's. Not sharp, not wet, just clear. "If you don't want to come back to the bakery," she said slowly. "I understand." Emily stiffened, bracing for disappointment. Joanne leaned in. "But maybe." She paused, searching for the right shape of the words. "Maybe you'd let me come to this life you've made." Emily's lips parted. Joanne continued. "I don't need you to wear the apron again or stand behind the counter, but maybe there's room in your world for a mother, just the regular kind." The quiet that followed was thick but soft, like a warm blanket pulled too tight. Emily stared at her, the edge in her jaw relaxing for the first time that night. And then she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She reached across the table and took her mother's hand. Her fingers were warm. Joanne's breath caught. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak. She just held on. "I'd like that," Emily said. "Really?" Lucy watched them, her eyes wide, shining with something unnameable. "You know," she said after a moment, "this is kind of historic." Joanne raised an eyebrow. "Oh, our first official family dinner," Lucy said. Emily gave her a look. What? Lucy grinned. "There were always just 2 plates before." Joanne squeezed her daughter's hand gently. "Then I guess we'll need to bake something to celebrate." Emily let out a breath that was half laugh, half release. "We might have some frozen dough. Chocolate chip, I think." "Chocolate chip?" Joanne feigned offense. "That's what you're leading with," Emily grinned. "You're a guest, not a critic." Joanne stood and moved toward the tiny oven tucked beneath the counter. Then let the guest do the honors. Together, the three of them prepared the cookies, rolling dough spacing parchment, setting the timer. It wasn't perfect. The first batch came out slightly overdone at the edges, but no one cared. They sat back down, splitting the warm, crumbly discs of sweetness into halves and thirds. No plates, no napkins, just fingers and smiles and chocolate-stained lips. Joanne held a piece of cookie in her palm and stared at it for a moment. "It's funny," she murmured. "What has Emily asked?" "All these years I measured love in portions," Joanne said. "Batches, orders, thinking that if I just baked enough, gave enough, you'd understand. But this," she held up the broken cookie. "This is the first thing I've ever made in years that wasn't meant to be sold. Just shared." Emily's eyes softened. "That's how I bake now, just to share." Joanne nodded. "It's better that way, isn't it?" "Yeah," Emily said, voice thickening. "Yeah, it is." They stayed at the table long after the cookies were gone, the tea cold, the light flickering above them like a lantern refusing to burn out. 3 women, 3 timelines, 1 moment. No customers, no business, no obligations. just the sound of quiet chewing, soft laughter, and something unspoken but deeply understood. They weren't fixing the past. They were writing something new. And that, Joanne thought, as she leaned back and looked across the small room filled with ordinary things and extraordinary presence that was more than enough. The sun was just beginning to rise when Joanne turned the key in the front lock of Emma's bakery for what would be the quietest opening the shop had ever seen. There was no music playing over the speakers, no scent of cinnamon rolls piping through the vents, no scribbled specials on the chalkboard outside. The table sat unlit in the hush of morning light, their wood cool and dappled in silver streaks from the half-open blinds. Joanne stepped inside slowly, her steps echoing in the silence. She moved without apron or gloves, her hands bare free of flour. Not because she wasn't working, but because this morning she was doing something else entirely, something sacred. She walked to table 4. The table was exactly as she had left it the day before. The same plate, the same fork, the same linen napkin folded with care. It had become a ritual so automatic that she had stopped noticing its weight. Only now, staring at it, did she realize just how long she had been waiting for someone who had already returned through a different door. Joanne reached forward. Her fingers brushed over the edge of the porcelain. She hesitated. Then she picked up the plate and set it gently on the counter behind her. She untied the ribbon that held the little laminated sign in place. Reserved. Table 4. She looked at the sign for a long moment, and then without drama, without ceremony, she folded it in half and placed it in the drawer beneath the counter. She didn't need it anymore. She turned off the lights. She closed the register, and she left the bakery in silence, not as a goodbye, but as a beginning. By mid-morning, the elevator in Emily's building groaned and rattled as it ascended to the 3rd floor. It hadn't seen many heavy loads in years. Today it carried something different. Joanne stepped out, hands gripping a dolly with a large, well-worn metal object draped in a quilted blanket. Emily opened the door just as Joanne knocked a half-smile tugging at her lips when she saw the familiar dent in the steel. "Is that the original convection oven?" Joanne said, from the back corner, "before we remodeled the kitchen, built in '97. She still hums when she preheats." Emily blinked, startled. "You brought it?" Joanne shrugged. "You said this kitchen's small, but it's got heart. Thought she'd fit right in." Lucy stood behind her mom, eyes wide with curiosity. "That's the one from the story." "The very one," Joanne said. Emily stepped aside, holding the door open as Joanne wheeled it in. They cleared a space beside the tiny stove, shifting counters, moving baskets, clearing shelves. The oven was heavy, but the 3 of them worked like limbs of the same body. No words, just movements, hands reaching to where they were needed, lifting in rhythm. Once it was plugged in, Joanne stepped back, brushing sweat from her brow. "You sure it works?" Emily asked, a teasing smirk on her lips. Joanne flicked the dial. A soft, familiar hum filled the air. "Still sings," she said, same note. Lucy clapped. "Let's make something." Joanne opened the small pantry door and surveyed the contents. Blueberries. Emily reached into the fridge. Check. Flour in the jar. Joanne grinned. "Then let's see if your hands remember how to fold." They moved around each other now with a comfort born not from repetition, but from release. The tension that had once made the air between them brittle was gone. In its place, lightness, an unspoken rhythm. Joanne taught Lucy how to sift gently, not just for texture but for breath. "Let the flour fall like snow," she whispered. Emily handled the wet ingredients, whisking with one hand while pressing her palm lightly against Lucy's back with the other, guiding, grounding. The oven's warmth began to bloom through the apartment. Not just heat, but memory, aroma, belonging. Laughter bubbled up as Lucy accidentally knocked over a bowl of sugar. Joanne didn't scold, she simply bent down and helped sweep it up. Emily burned her thumb and yelped. Joanne passed her a cool towel and muttered, "Still reaching too fast." Emily grinned, still judging my technique. Joanne paused, then looked at her daughter and said gently, "Not today." Emily's smile softened. Lucy leaned against the counter as the tray of blueberry scones was slid into the oven. "Can we eat them warm?" she asked. "That's the only way," Joanne said. They waited, the 3 of them sitting on the floor near the oven backs against cabinets like campers around a fire. The oven ticked softly. The scent grew richer, blueberries melting into steamed sugar, caramelizing butter curling at the edges. And when the timer finally beeped, Joanne pulled out the tray, and set it on the stovetop. Steam rose like memory released. Joanne reached for a knife. She placed a single scone on a plate, then carefully cut it in half. She turned and held one piece out to Emily. Her voice caught slightly. "Today I'm not baking to sell." She held the other half up. "I'm baking to share." Emily took the scone with both hands, her fingers trembling. Joanne met her eyes. For the first time in a long time, Joanne said, "I just want to eat with my daughter." Emily stared at the scone, and then quietly, without warning, she began to cry. Not a sob, not a wail, just tears, steady, sincere, cleansing. Joanne set down the other half and moved forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Emily fell into the embrace, letting her head rest on her mother's shoulder, like she had as a child after falling from her bike. As if nothing in the world could fix the past, but maybe this right here could fix them. Lucy stood there for a second watching. Then she stepped into the circle of arms and wrapped herself around both. 3 generations. No bakery signs, no tables reserved. Just warmth, just love. Just one blueberry scone broken in half, not for business, not for performance, but for healing. And the room for that moment was whole. 1 month later, the scent of vanilla yeast and fresh berries once again drifted through the halls of the old apartment building. But this time it didn't stop at the door. It spilled out into the stairwell, down to the street, out through the open windows, where flower pots now bloomed from the sills. A hand-painted sign hung crookedly by the doorway, made from reclaimed wood and painted with bold sun-brushed letters. Emma's Kitchen for All. Below it, in smaller script, someone had written, "Where every story rises." The apartment had transformed not lavishly but lovingly. The living room had become a makeshift classroom, 3 counters fashioned from butcher-block wood rolling pins hanging on hooks, mismatched bowls stacked neatly on open shelves. The old convection oven stood proudly beneath the window, humming gently like a heart that had finally found its rhythm again. Children's laughter echoed down the hallway. Not loud, but full, unfiltered joy. There were voices in every room now, mothers speaking softly in Spanish, Vietnamese, Creole. Young girls asking questions about baking ratios, oven timing, and how to fold egg whites without deflating the batter. Flour dust hung in the air like sunlight caught mid-breath, and in the middle of it all stood Emily, apron dusted, white sleeves rolled to her elbows, smile soft but steady. She moved between stations like a quiet current, correcting one dough's texture, guiding another's hands, checking the oven as it ticked out its steady rhythm. She wasn't just teaching recipes, she was teaching restoration. In a corner near the window, Lucy stood beside a younger girl, showing her how to knead with the heels of her palms. Like this, press and push, not too fast. Let the dough feel you. Talk to it if it helps. The girl giggled and followed along. Joanne sat nearby, shelling pistachios into a glass bowl. Her fingers moved more slowly now, but with the grace of decades. She didn't give instructions unless asked. She didn't hover, but she was always watching, ready, present. Sometimes she held Lucy's recipe notebook while the girl talked. Sometimes she simply poured tea and passed it around to the group like communion. Everyone in the room called her Grandma Jo. The women, some with weary eyes, some with cautious smiles, began arriving every morning at 9. They left strollers near the stairwell, carried grocery bags filled with hope and uncertainty. But after a week they started arriving early. They stayed longer. They brought their children, their laughter, their stories. One woman, Amina, had fled an abusive marriage 2 years ago and never thought she'd bake again. Another Trang had never used a real oven, but now taught others how to glaze bread with pandan syrup. They told their stories while mixing dough, tears sometimes falling into the flour, and no one stopped them. Here, pain was welcome. Stories were ingredients, too. There were no resumes, no tuition. Only the smell of fresh bread and the soft cadence of trust returning to tired voices. The space once silent and sealed in grief now thrummed with purpose. Lucy started calling it the bakery with no cash register, because there were no sales, only sharing. Only warm loaves sent home in old grocery bags, only cookies traded for stories, only muffins passed across the table as apologies. Congratulations, confessions. One Thursday afternoon, a little girl named Tilly handed Joanne a cupcake and whispered, "I made this for you because I heard you're the grandma who never forgets birthdays." Joanne teared up as she bit into the overly sweet, clumsily frosted treat and declared it the best she'd ever had. Emily smiled from across the room. Their eyes met. No words needed. They had built something new, not in the image of the past, but from its ashes. Emma's bakery was no longer a storefront with etched windows and a table for that stood in silent vigil. It had become something softer, more fluid. No signs, no reservations, just presence. Love folded gently into dough risen in the warmth of forgiveness. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city casting golden light across the rooftops, the three of them sat on the tiny balcony off Emily's kitchen. They shared a single plate between them, a still warm loaf of banana nut bread split into thirds. Joanne leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, listening to the faint sounds of music drifting from a neighbor's apartment. Her gray hair shimmered in the golden light. Lucy sat cross-legged between them, her head resting lightly against Emily's knee, cradling her half-slice like it was a treasure. Emily had one arm draped over the back of Joanne's chair, the other curled around her tea. For a long time no one spoke, and then Joanne broke the silence, voice soft as the breeze. "There's no empty chairs here." Emily smiled, eyes still on the horizon. "No need anymore." Lucy looked up, mouth full of banana bread. "We should paint one," she said, "like on the wall, with all three of us sitting in it." Joanne laughed. "A mural, a memory," Lucy said, "but not the sad kind, the kind that shows we made it through." Emily reached out and brushed Lucy's cheek with the back of her hand. "I like that," she said, "a memory that bakes back joy." They sat there until the sky turned pink, then purple, then blue, until the city lights blinked on like a constellation made just for them. Until the bread was gone, the tea was cold, and the day had folded in on itself with the soft finality of something complete. Not perfect, but whole. And in that small, borrowed corner of the city, in a home that had once held nothing but regret, three women bound by blood, choice, and healing looked out at the world not as it was, but as they had remade it. Together,